Welcome to the US English Lab. Let's master your English together.
You know, when you picture someone trying to master a new language, there is this very specific, almost universal image that comes to mind.
Oh, yeah, and it usually looks like a mild form of medieval torture, doesn't it?
Exactly. It's like you picture someone hunched over this heavy 200-page textbook in a weirdly fluorescent lit room, just staring at a chalkboard completely covered in verb conjugations.
Right, flipping through hundreds of vocabulary flashcards.
And they're just muttering phrases over and over to themselves with this look of absolute soul-crushing boredom. It's as if we've collectively, as a society, decided that learning a language must be painful in order to be effective.
We really do. We treat it like taking this foul-tasting medicine.
We do.
It's the classic, no pain, no gain philosophy, but applied to cognitive development.
Which is so weird when you think about it.
It is, because there is this pervasive assumption in traditional education that if you aren't actively suffering through rote memorization,
Sweating over past participle irregulars until your eyes cross.
exactly. The assumption is that if you aren't doing that, you simply aren't doing the work. We've historically treated the human brain like an empty filing cabinet that just needs to be aggressively manually stuffed with raw data.
Right, like you force the grammar rules into the folders, you lock the cabinet, and you just expect to be able to open it on demand.
But that's not how it works.
No, it's not. Because then you step out of that fluorescent classroom and into the actual real world, and you realize that the filing cabinet is just completely jammed.
The key is broken.
Right. Because when you actually need to speak, when you are standing in a loud coffee shop trying to order, or you're trying to make a self-deprecating joke at a dinner party, all those flashcards just vanish into thin air.
You completely freeze up.
You freeze. Suddenly, we are looking at an educational landscape that feels completely backward. The things we try the hardest to consciously force into our brains are often the very first things we forget.
Absolutely.
Meanwhile, the language we pick up effortlessly, usually when we're just having fun or watching a movie or laughing with a friend, that stuff sticks with us for decades.
And that right there, that is the core pedagogical paradox we are dealing with today. Conscious learning versus subconscious acquisition.
Okay, lay it on me.
Well, it turns out the brain doesn't actually want to be a filing cabinet. It wants to be a pattern recognition machine. It wants context.
It craves a story.
It craves emotional resonance. When we strip all the joy and humor out of language learning to make it, serious and academic, we're actually stripping away the very mechanisms the brain uses to encode long-term memory.
Which brings us to the entire reason we are here today. I was going through this massive stack of sources for our deep dive academic papers on cognitive psychology, data on multimedia learning.
Some really dense stuff in there.
Super dense. But also transcripts from some massively popular British English learning shows, like Luke's English podcast. But the thing that really caught my eye, the thing that anchored this for me, was this literal script blueprint I found for a show called the English Leap podcast.
Oh, that blueprint is fascinating.
It completely flipped my perspective on how this all works. Their entire mission is to teach you how to master English naturally, specifically how to talk about your day by tricking you into completely forgetting that you were even studying.
It's a Trojan horse approach.
It really is. The argument across all these sources is that you should just have a laugh, talk absolute rubbish about your chaotic life, and absorb fluency organically along the way.
It's a radically different approach to instructional design, compared to what we're used to. We are looking at a direct conflict between traditional grammar drills and a highly entertaining conversational comedy format. The central thesis we are exploring today is that a learner will actually retain more vocabulary and grammatical structure when they are laughing and engaged, rather than when they are stressed and hyper-focused on perfection.
We are essentially trying to prove that humor is a biological imperative for optimal learning.
Exactly.
But before we actually jump into the practical side of this, the actual vocabulary you need to describe your chaotic morning routine or your terrible commute, we really need to lay the groundwork and understand the why.
The underlying mechanics.
Right. I want to know the mechanics. Why do traditional grammar drills feel like you are walking barefoot on hot coals? And why is humor apparently the neurological antidote to that pain?
Well, to understand the mechanics of that, we have to look at the cognitive psychology presented in the academic literature, particularly drawing on the research of Lance Askildsen, who builds heavily on the foundational theories of a linguist named Stephen Krashen.
Krashen is a huge name in this space.
Massive. In the 1980s, Krashen introduced a concept called the affective filter hypothesis, and it remains one of the most vital concepts in language acquisition today.
Okay, so what is this filter?
Well, if you want to visualize the affective filter, think of it as an invisible neurological barricade located right in the middle of your brain's language processing centers.
Like a literal wall that drops down when you feel threatened.
Conceptually, yes. The theory suggests that humans possess an innate language acquisition device, basically a subconscious processor that naturally absorbs linguistic patterns from our environment.
Just by being around it.
Right. However, this device only functions optimally when the learner is in a state of low anxiety and high motivation.
Which a classroom usually is not.
Exactly. When a learner becomes stressed, self-conscious, or fearful, which is exactly what happens when you are terrified of conjugating a verb incorrectly in front of 30 silent classmates, that affective filter goes straight up.
I can feel that happening physically just thinking about it. My heart rate goes up, my palms sweat. It's the classic fight-or-flight response, but triggered by a Spanish pop quiz.
Because your brain is perceiving a social threat. From an evolutionary standpoint, public failure or social rejection was dangerous.
You'd get kicked out of the tribe.
Precisely. So when that anxiety hits, your endocrine system releases stress hormones, primarily cortisol.
And cortisol is bad for learning.
Cortisol is fantastic if you need to run away from a predator, but it is absolutely disastrous for higher order cognitive processing. The amygdala, which processes fear, essentially hijacks your prefrontal cortex.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when the affective filter is high, the linguistic input you are receiving, like a teacher talking or the textbook you are reading, literally bounces off that barricade.
It just doesn't get through.
The input never reaches the language acquisition device. You can stare at a grammar rule for 3 hours, but if your cortisol levels are spiked, you are neurologically incapable of acquiring that language.
That perfectly explains my entire high school French experience.
Oh, really?
I spent 4 years in that classroom. I passed the tests by cramming the night before, but the only thing I can confidently say today is je m'appelle, and maybe ask for a croissant.
Because you were stressed?
My filter was basically a reinforced steel vault door because I was so worried about my accent. So if anxiety builds the wall, how does humor act as the demolition crew? How does a joke tear that wall down?
The research introduces the concept of immediacy behaviors. In pedagogy, immediacy behaviors are specific verbal or nonverbal actions that a teacher, a host, or conversational partner uses to reduce social distance.
To make things less awkward.
Exactly, to lower the psychological barriers between people. It's about creating warmth and psychological safety. Leaning in, using personal anecdotes, making eye contact, these are all immediacy behaviors.
Okay, I see.
But humor is universally considered the ultimate, most powerful immediacy behavior available to us.
Because it forces a shared reality. I mean, if we are laughing at the same thing, we are on the same team. We aren't judging each other.
And there is a massive neurochemical shift that happens when you laugh. The humor neutralizes the cortisol.
It flushes it out.
Right. Your brain releases endorphins and dopamine instead. And dopamine, crucially, is linked to motivation, reward, and memory consolidation.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
When you are laughing, you are creating a pro-social, deeply relaxed physiological environment. The affective filter drops completely, the barricade is gone.
And suddenly the brain is just soaking it up.
Yes, your brain is primed, open, and incredibly receptive. It begins to absorb the vocabulary and the syntax subconsciously, without you having to consciously force the data into the filing cabinet.
You know, I found a really specific example of this in Askelton's paper, and it illustrates this perfectly. It's a targeted linguistic joke designed specifically for English learners.
Oh, the tense joke.
Yes. Let me set the scene for you. So a teacher walks into a classroom, and they look terrible. Pale, sweating, clearly unwell. A student raises their hand and asks, "What's the matter?" The teacher groans and replies, "Tense." The student pauses for a second, looks incredibly confused, and then asks, "Okay. What was the matter? What has been the matter? What will be the matter?"
It is a phenomenal example of using humor as a Trojan horse for grammar.
It really is.
Because on the surface, the learner is just enjoying a moment of comedic misunderstanding. The teacher is using the word tense as an adjective to describe their physical state. They are stressed, their muscles are tight, they feel ill.
But the student is traumatized by grammar.
Right. The student, who is clearly traumatized by English grammar drills, hears the word tense as a noun. They think the teacher is initiating a drill about grammatical timeframes.
But subconsciously, while the learner is just laughing at the student's ridiculous response, their brain is doing a massive amount of heavy lifting.
It really is.
Just to understand why the punchline is funny, the listener has to instantly process the simple past, the present perfect, and the simple future tenses they are encountering was, has been, and will be in a meaningful, authentic context.
And they're doing it willingly. They aren't resisting the grammar. They're actively seeking to resolve it because the reward is the punchline.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though.
Go for it.
Because I can hear the traditionalist teachers screaming at their speakers right now.
Oh, I'm sure they are.
If I am just listening to a podcast and laughing at a joke about a confused student, am I actually going to retain the grammatical structure of the present perfect tense? Or am I just going to remember the punchline?
That's a valid question.
Because it feels a bit like watching a really good magic trick. I am entertained, I am amazed by the illusion, but I don't actually walk away knowing how to perform the trick myself. How does temporary entertainment translate to permanent long-term fluency?
That is the crux of the debate right there. And it brings us to a foundational concept in cognitive psychology called the levels of processing theory.
Okay, what's that?
It was originally proposed by Craig and Lockhart in the 1970s. This theory posits that memory recall is not just about how often you repeat something, but about how deeply you process it.
So it's quality over quantity of repetition.
Fundamentally, yes. When you sit with a flashcard that says, present perfect equals has or have plus past participle, you are engaging in very shallow processing.
Just looking at the shapes of the words, basically.
Exactly. You are looking at the structural phonetic properties of the words. It is semantically isolated. The brain looks at it and says, this has no emotional value to my survival or my social standing. And it discards the information quickly.
It goes straight into the mental junk drawer.
But when you hear a joke, your brain has to perform a highly complex cognitive task. Humor relies on incongruity.
The setup and the twist.
Right. The brain is presented with a setup that leads in one direction and a punchline that violently twists in another. To resolve that incongruity, to basically get the joke, your brain has to rapidly search its semantic databases.
It has to cross-reference everything.
Yes, it cross-references multiple meanings of words and integrates the linguistic data with an emotional reaction. You are firing on all cylinders.
You are actively solving a puzzle, and the dopamine hit of the laugh is the reward for solving it.
And that deep active processing creates a much stronger neural pathway. You are integrating semantic knowledge, the grammar rules, with episodic memory, the experience of hearing the joke and laughing.
Tying the emotion to the data.
Precisely. When information is tied to an emotional state, the amygdala signals the hippocampus to encode it as a long-term memory. That emotionally resonant context creates a memory trace that is infinitely deeper and more durable than anything you could build with isolated vocabulary drills.
You aren't just memorizing the language, you're living it.
Exactly.
So the humor is literally chemically binding the vocabulary to my brain. Okay, the theory is brilliant. Now we need to look at how the sources actually put this into practice.
Right, the application.
How do we engineer this deep processing? And according to the English Leap podcast blueprint, the most effective way to trigger this conversational learning is to apply it to something every single human being on Earth universally despises.
The morning routine.
The morning routine. They suggest using a specific comedic format to complain about waking up.
The format they utilize is called Room 101.
Like the torture chamber.
Yes. To give a bit of cultural context, Room 101 was originally a terrifying torture chamber in George Orwell's dystopian novel 1984, where a person would face their ultimate worst fear.
But the British spun it into comedy.
They did. British television brilliantly adapted this dark concept into a highly popular, lighthearted comedy panel show. In the comedic version, guests passionately argued to banish their biggest pet peeves, minor annoyances, and daily frustrations into the vault of Room 101 so they can be erased from existence forever.
And the sources highlight the specific format because complaining is one of the most powerful linguistic engines we have.
It truly is.
Because if you ask someone to describe their morning objectively, they will use boring, rigid English. I woke up at 6, I took a shower, I ate toast. It's lifeless.
It's robotic.
But if you ask someone to complain about their morning, suddenly the passion comes out. The hyperbole comes out. They start using rich, descriptive idioms and complex phrasal verbs because they desperately want you to understand their pain. Complaining is a great unifier.
It creates an immediate emotional bridge between the speaker and the listener. It lowers the affective filter because everyone can relate to the mundane misery of a Tuesday morning.
It's universally awful. So, adopting the blueprint from our sources, I am going to officially nominate the modern alarm clock for immediate, permanent banishment into room 101.
A strong choice.
Because, let's be honest, my alarm does not chime delicately like a cartoon bird welcoming the sunrise. It goes off at 6 a.m., and it sounds like a literal klaxon warning of a nuclear meltdown. It is a violent intrusion into my peace.
Let's isolate the phrasing you just used, because it is incredibly dense with linguistic value. You said the alarm goes off.
Right.
This is our first crucial encounter with the phrasal verb, and go off is notoriously confusing for English learners because it feels entirely counterintuitive.
It really does, because when an alarm goes off, it doesn't turn off. It actually turns on and starts making a horrific amount of noise.
Right. The logic behind it stems from the idea of a sudden release of built-up energy or a sudden departure from a state of rest. Think about the other contexts where native speakers use this exact phrasal verb.
Like a bomb.
Yes, if a bomb goes off, it detonates. If a gun goes off, it fires. The tension is released violently.
Which perfectly describes the trauma of a 6:00 a.m. alarm. It feels like an explosion next to my head.
Furthermore, if we look at the vocabulary data sets provided in the sources, go off expands into other domains too.
Oh, like food.
Exactly. If food or milk goes off, it means it has spoiled, is departed from its state of freshness. If an appliance goes off, it breaks down.
Wow, so many uses.
By embedding this phrasal verb inside a passionate complaint about an alarm clock, the learner is given a vivid sensory anchor. The emotional context of being jolted awake makes the counterintuitive nature of go off memorable.
Okay, so the alarm goes off. And what do? I panic, and I aggressively hit the snooze button. I hit it 4 times. Which means, tragically, I have to suffer through the physical process of waking up over and over and over again, completely regretting every choice that led me to this moment.
And here we find a very subtle yet vital distinction that textbooks often gloss over, but native conversationalists rely on heavily. The difference between waking up and getting up.
Oh, they are completely different.
A learner might assume these are exact synonyms, but they describe entirely different phases of the morning trauma.
They are miles apart. Waking up is purely neurological. Your eyes flutter open, you regain consciousness, you realize you are still in this mortal realm, and you recognize that it is morning, but you are still under the warm blankets.
Safely in bed.
Exactly. Getting up, however, that is the heroic, agonizing physical act of throwing the blankets off, putting your bare feet on the freezing hardwood floor, and vertically elevating your body. Waking up happens to you. Getting up is a choice you have to make.
The instructional design in the source material leverages this distinction beautifully. By exaggerating the physical pain of the morning, describing the cold floor, the heaviness of the limbs, the comedy naturally separates the definitions of these two phrasal verbs.
You feel the difference.
You do. The learner doesn't need a dictionary definition. They understand the difference viscerally through the host's hyperbolic suffering.
It is pure suffering. Because when I finally get up, I almost always feel a bit under the weather, which is ridiculous because I'm not actually sick. I don't have a fever. I'm just fundamentally allergic to the morning.
Fair enough.
But I know I can't stay in bed forever, staring at the ceiling. I have to just bite the bullet and jump in the shower.
In those 3 sentences, you've deployed 3 distinct idiomatic expressions that are foundational to native fluency.
Let's break them down.
Let's unpack the mechanisms behind them. Feeling under the weather is used to describe feeling wildly unwell, lethargic, or out of sorts. It's not a severe illness, it's a general malaise.
Where does that even come from?
The etymology is fascinating. It's an old maritime term. When sailors were feeling seasick, they would literally go below deck under the weather bow to escape the harsh conditions. The spatial metaphor evolved to mean feeling sick.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love knowing where these come from. And then we have bite the bullet, which is a much more aggressive idiom. It means to force yourself to face a highly difficult, unpleasant, or painful situation with courage, knowing that it is inevitable.
Again, the historical context anchors the meaning here. Before modern anesthesia, battlefield surgeons would have wounded soldiers literally bite down on a soft lead bullet to help them cope with the excruciating pain of an operation without screaming.
Which is exactly what stepping into a lukewarm shower at 6:30 a.m. feels like. It's an operation I must endure.
And finally, you use the phrasal verb jump in. As the Learn English Vocabulary Source text points out, this is a prime example of metaphorical extension.
Because I'm not doing a literal cannonball into the tub.
Right. You aren't literally leaping into the air and landing in the bathtub, which would be incredibly dangerous on wet tile. You are using the concept of jumping to convey entering a situation quickly, decisively, and perhaps a bit recklessly. You jump in the shower.
Or a conversation.
Exactly. You can jump into conversation to interrupt or jump into a new project. The physical action maps onto abstract concepts.
Now, once I am actually in the bathroom, something terrifying happens. The fundamental laws of physics seem to change. Time dilation occurs. I have to keep an eye on the clock because I swear to you, I only stand in the shower for 3 minutes.
It always feels that way.
But when I step out and look at my watch, 45 minutes have vanished into the ether. I have somehow lost an hour. So now the panic sets in. I have to frantically put on whatever wrinkled clothes are lying on a chair, sprint to the kitchen, and try to eat up and drink up my breakfast while tying my shoes before bolting out the front door.
Notice the specific linguistic choice you made when describing breakfast just then.
What did I do?
You didn't just say you eat and drink. You said you eat up and drink up. The addition of the particle up dramatically alters the verb. In this specific grammatical context, up doesn't mean a vertical direction. It acts as an aspectual marker indicating completion.
Like reaching the absolute limit of something.
Precisely. If you tell a child to eat their vegetables, you are just asking them to perform the action. If you tell them to eat up, you are commanding them to finish every last bite on the plate, and usually to do it quickly. The up signifies totality.
That is such a tiny word doing so much work.
It really is. What is truly remarkable about this entire Room 101 exercise is how this hyperbolic banter functions as a hidden pedagogical engine.
Okay, break that down for me.
According to the applied linguistics research of Webb and Nation, cited in our materials, a language learner generally needs between 7 and 16 meaningful, contextualized encounters with a new word or phrase to deeply encode it into their long-term memory.
So if I just look at the phrase eat up on a piece of paper once, it's basically useless. I need to bump into it in the wild a dozen times before it becomes mine.
Yes. And the brilliance of the conversational comedy format is that it provides natural spaced repetition.
Because we keep talking about it.
Right. By circling around the topic of the morning routine, complaining about different aspects of it, you naturally repeat these phrasal verbs in slightly different contexts. You are keeping the listener's visual and auditory attention extremely high because they are entertained by the narrative of your chaotic morning.
They want to know what happens next.
But simultaneously, beneath the surface of the comedy, you are systematically feeding their brain those 7 to 16 encounters with phrases like get up, go off, and put on. It's engineered to feel like two friends having a casual chat at a pub, but structurally, it is meticulously designed for maximum cognitive retention.
The absurdity of that morning routine actually primes us perfectly for the next massive hurdle of the day. Because sadly, we survived the bathroom, but the horror is far from over.
Oh no, it's just beginning.
We actually have to leave the house. The survival mechanisms we use to force ourselves out of bed are the exact same linguistic tools we are going to need to survive the workplace.
The corporate jungle.
Let's transition into the corporate world. According to the sources, the office environment is where phrasal verbs and idioms aren't just colorful additions to your vocabulary, they form the absolute, non-negotiable backbone of professional native English.
The modern workplace is a fascinating linguistic minefield, truly. It operates on a dialect all its own.
It really does.
The highly formal, rigid grammar that learners spend years mastering in textbooks often goes completely out the window the moment they step into an office, replaced by a highly specific, idiomatic code that relies heavily on sports metaphors, nautical terms, and phrasal verbs.
Right. Let's map out the journey. You finally set off for your terrible commute. You arrive at the office building, you clock in, and you slowly set up your workspace, arranging your coffee mug and your highlighters to delay doing actual work.
The essential stalling tactics.
That's the baseline. But then, the real tragedy of the modern era begins. The 9.00 a.m. virtual Zoom meeting. Let's build a scenario using the vocabulary from our sources. Let's say you have a colleague. We'll call him Jim. Jim is that guy who always likes to stir up trouble on the video call just because he's bored.
Stir up is an incredibly evocative visual metaphor. It means to cause a problem to grow, to provoke an argument, or to incite negative emotions.
Like stirring a pot.
Exactly. If you think about taking a large wooden spoon to a pot of calm, resting water and violently swirling around until the sediment at the bottom rises and the water threatens to boil over, that is what Jim is doing to the meeting. He introduces a controversial topic, just to watch the chaos unfold.
Jim thrives on the chaos. He stirs the pot. Meanwhile, the middle manager is sweating through his shirt, desperately trying to drum into everyone the critical importance of the Q3 deliverables.
Drum into is another fantastic phrase. To teach something persistently, almost aggressively, by repeating it over and over until it is forcefully memorized.
Like a literal drum.
It evokes the rhythmic, inescapable pounding beat of a drum. The boss isn't just sharing information. They're trying to physically force the data into your skull through sheer repetition.
But the problem is, the boss has been talking in a monotone voice for 45 minutes about synergy and action items, and let's be honest about human nature, you start to drift off, you lose focus.
It happens to everyone.
Your eyes glaze over, staring at the little squares on the screen, and you literally start to fall asleep sitting straight up in your ergonomic chair. Your consciousness fades, and then suddenly, you wake up in a panic to the sound of your own snorting.
Which, in the context of a professional video call, is an absolute nightmare scenario.
It is horrifying in the moment. But later that evening, when you are at the pub telling your work best friend about how you snorted on the company-wide call, it absolutely cracks you up. You laugh uncontrollably at the sheer absurdity and embarrassment of it.
Because the distance makes it funny.
Exactly. But back in the reality of the meeting, you need an immediate excuse. The boss is staring at you. And the source text from the English Leap podcast provides the absolute perfect, native-level corporate excuse.
Oh, this is good.
You feign technical difficulties. You say, sorry, boss, my audio was lagging. I didn't catch that.
Classic move.
It is the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. But it leaves you to completely fend for yourself when they ask you a follow-up question.
Fend for yourself, to take care of yourself, to provide for your own needs, or to defend yourself without any external help, usually in a highly difficult or hostile situation.
Like being stranded.
It's a very primal phrase. It evokes imagery of being abandoned in the wilderness, having to hunt for your own food. Applying that life or death wilderness survival metaphor to the mundane panic of a Zoom meeting is exactly why the phrase is so comedic and memorable for a learner.
It feels like life or death when the boss asks you to repeat the Q3 projections. In the Practice Me text, we analyzed layers in even more advanced corporate idioms for this exact scenario. Because if your boss realizes you are actually sleeping, you can't just offer a simple apology.
No, the culture demands performative dedication.
You have to assure them, on the spot, that you are going to go the extra mile to fix it.
Which means you are promising to put in significantly more effort than is strictly required or expected by your job description. You will exceed the baseline.
And to achieve that, you assure them you're going to burn the midnight oil tonight.
A beautiful idiom that dates back to the era before electricity, when people literally had to burn expensive oil in their lamps if they wanted to continue working or studying after the sun went down. It means working late into the night.
All of this groveling is required just to ensure that the entire project doesn't have to go back to the drawing board.
Meaning the current plan or design has completely and utterly failed, and you must start over from the very beginning, returning to the literal architectural drawing board to sketch a new idea.
This entire workplace scenario highlights something I think is absolutely crucial for anyone trying to survive in an English-speaking office. I always compare these workplace idioms to a corporate secret handshake.
That's a great analogy.
You could spend 10 years studying English. You could have absolutely flawless, textbook perfect grammar. You could know every vocabulary word in the dictionary. But if you sit in a boardroom and your manager says, all right, team, the ball is in your court. Let's touch base next week and see if we can move the needle. And you take those words literally.
You're completely lost.
You are completely locked out of the culture. You are looking for a basketball. You are wondering where the base is. And you are terrified of needles. You don't have the secret handshake. And therefore, you are not truly part of the team.
The linguistic data backs up your analogy perfectly. Corpus linguistics, the study of language as it is expressed in massive real-world text samples, shows that idiomatic expressions, phrasal verbs, and metaphorical collocations appear in roughly 4 out of every 10 sentences in casual professional conversation.
40%! That is staggering.
Think about the gravity of that statistic. If you do not understand these idioms, you are missing nearly 50% of the actual meaning being conveyed in the room. You are hearing the phonetic sounds, you understand the individual words, but you are completely blind to the subtext, the tone, and the actual directives being given.
It's like watching a movie with the audio track out of sync. You see their mouths moving, but the story isn't making sense.
Exactly.
So we survived the morning commute, we faked our way through the treacherous Zoom meeting, and somehow it is finally 5:00 p.m. Work is over.
The best time of day.
The friction of the day is done. It is time to call it a day, to pack up your bag, head home, wind down, and hang out with your friends. Which leads us to the next major phase of our linguistic journey: socializing, unstructured storytelling, and the highly nuanced art of what the British lovingly call talking rubbish.
This is a fascinating transition because when we look at the pedagogical theory from SciUp, combined with the actual transcript data from Luke's English podcast, we see a massive shift in how language is used.
How so?
When native speakers are relaxing at a pub or in a living room, they are not exchanging rigid, bullet-pointed packets of information. They're not giving presentations. They're telling stories.
Just bouncing around.
Right. They're engaging in chaotic, highly tangential, unstructured banter. And neurologically speaking, storytelling is not just entertainment. It is the fundamental mechanism through which human beings have transmitted complex knowledge, culture, and social norms since the dawn of our species.
It's how we make sense of the world.
Storytelling creates immediate context. It builds deep emotional bonds between the speaker and the listener. It forces the listener to actively predict what is going to happen next, which engages the prefrontal cortex in a highly active state of language processing.
If you look at the source material analyzing an episode of Luke's Family Podcast where he literally just records conversations with his brother and dad, it is glorious, unfiltered chaos.
Total chaos.
It doesn't look anything like a lesson plan. In a single hour-long recording, they jump wildly from topic to topic. They talk about the logistics of climbing Welsh mountains. Then they immediately pivot to debating the aesthetic merits of David Beckham's tattoos.
As you do.
Then they get into a philosophical debate about the ethics of burning money. They take a mock British citizenship test. They swap creepy ghost stories. And then they spend 10 minutes analyzing a viral internet video of a baby monkey riding on the back of a pig. It is all over the place.
It really is.
It feels like madness compared to a structured textbook chapter titled At the Post Office.
It absolutely sounds chaotic to a traditional educator, but to a cognitive linguist, it is an absolute goldmine for acquisition. And it's critical to point out that this talking rubbish isn't solely composed of lighthearted jokes and superficial banter.
Right, it gets real.
The unstructured nature of the conversation allows it to flow into surprisingly deep waters. For instance, the sources highlight a specific listener comment from a user named Alexander Gregg regarding that viral video of the monkey and the piglet.
Right. The podcast hosts were initially laughing at the video because, on the surface, a monkey riding a pig is visually absurd. But Alexander Gregg's comment pointed out the darker, hidden reality behind the video.
The animal welfare issue.
He noted that the monkey and the piglet were actually in deep psychological distress, being forced to perform for tourists in a highly unnatural environment. It suddenly brought up a very serious, emotionally heavy point about animal cruelty and Western ignorance of foreign tourist traps.
And while our goal here on this deep dive is not to litigate the ethics of that specific video or take a moral stance on the tourism industry, from a pure language acquisition standpoint, that comment and the host's subsequent reaction to it are incredibly valuable.
How so?
When the hosts realize the reality of the video, their tone shifts, their vocabulary shifts. It shows the learner how native speakers navigate complex, morally weighted debates in real time. It demonstrates how to express distress, how to admit you were wrong, how to show empathy, and how to respectfully disagree in a natural conversational flow.
It's so much more authentic than reciting a stiff textbook dialogue that says, I disagree with your opinion, John. I think we should protect animals.
Exactly.
You get to hear the hesitations, the softening phrases, the way native speakers carefully tread around sensitive topics.
It adds immense emotional gravity to the language. And as we established earlier with the levels of processing theory, when language is tied to a strong emotional state, whether that is the joy of a joke or the empathy of realizing an animal is suffering, it anchors the vocabulary incredibly deeply in the neural network. You are getting the full, vibrant spectrum of human experience, not the sanitized, two-dimensional version presented in educational materials.
And woven through all of this social storytelling, whether it's a debate about Beckham or a ghost story, is a whole new layer of social vocabulary, the idioms of connection. When you meet a new group of friends, the first thing you have to do is break the ice, ease the initial social tension and awkwardness. And if you immediately get along, you share a sense of humor, you hit it off.
If you're chatting and you discover a shared connection, maybe you both grew up in the same small town or, the same obscure band, you might exclaim, wow, it's a small world.
Right.
Or if someone you were literally just gossiping about suddenly walks into the pub, you would say, speak of the devil.
Which is such a funny phrase when you think about it, because the full original 16th century proverb was, speak of the devil and he doth appear, implying that just saying his name would summon evil.
It used to be a warning.
But over the centuries, we've chopped the dark part off, and now it's just a cheerful greeting when Dave walks into the room. And once Dave sits down, the gossip inevitably starts. Someone spills the beans or lets the cat out of the bag, meaning they accidentally or purposefully reveal a hidden secret.
And if Dave tells you a story that sounds completely outrageous and unbelievable, you have to figure out if he's being serious or if he's just pulling your leg, playing a practical joke on you by lying with a straight face.
Okay, I'm going to pause here because I have to play devil's advocate again.
Oh, I'm ready.
We have just rapidly listed off a dozen complex idioms. We've talked about ghost stories, monkey videos, and David Beckham. The sheer volume of information is staggering. Isn't it incredibly dangerous for a beginner or intermediate learner to listen to this kind of unstructured, chaotic rambling?
That's a very common fear.
What if they just get completely lost in all the tangents and give up? Shouldn't a good lesson be strictly focused? Monday is past tense verbs, Tuesday is food vocabulary, Wednesday is prepositions. Why isn't that better?
It is a completely logical concern, and it is the reason textbooks are structured the way they are. But modern cognitive psychology provides a highly counterintuitive answer to your question. The chaos is actually the point, due to a concept called interleaving.
Interleaving.
Yes. To understand interleaving, we have to look at the work of cognitive psychologist Robert Bjork, who introduced the theory of desirable difficulties.
Desirable difficulties. So the idea is that you are intentionally making the learning process slightly harder on purpose. Why would anyone want that?
Because the brain is fundamentally lazy, and it will take shortcuts if you let it. Traditional education uses what is called blocked practice.
Like doing the same thing over and over.
Exactly. You study concept A for an hour, then concept B for an hour. You drill 10 sentences in the past tense. Your brain figures out the pattern by sentence 3, and for the next 7 sentences, it essentially goes to sleep. It just copies the structure without thinking.
That feels productive in the moment, though.
It does. Your immediate performance in the classroom looks fantastic. The teacher thinks you're a genius. But because you didn't have to work hard to retrieve the rule, the memory trace is incredibly weak. By the time you wake up tomorrow, you have forgotten it.
It's like doing a bicep curl with a 1-pound weight. It looks like you're exercising, but you aren't actually tearing the muscle fibers to build strength.
That is a perfect physiological analogy. Interleaving, on the other hand, mixes the topics up. It alternates between narrative storytelling, comedic banter, and explicit vocabulary breakdowns.
Keeping the brain guessing.
Right. You hear a ghost story, which is concept A, then an idiom breakdown, concept B, then a serious debate about a monkey, concept C. By constantly shifting the context, you force the brain to abandon its shortcuts. Every time the topic changes, the brain has to completely reload the relevant linguistic rules and vocabulary from scratch.
You are forcing the brain to constantly retrieve the data from the hard drive rather than just keeping it in the active RAM.
Yes. And that constant effort of retrieval, the slight struggle, the momentary confusion before you catch up to the conversation, is the desirable difficulty. It physically slows down your immediate comprehension.
So it feels harder.
You might feel like you are struggling more in the moment compared to a blocked grammar drill, but that struggle is actively building robust, permanent neural pathways. It massively improves your long-term memory recall and your ability to transfer that knowledge to novel situations. The chaos of a natural conversation isn't a distraction. It is a highly structured cognitive workout.
That completely blows my mind. The chaos is the workout. The friction is the point. But before we send our listeners out into the world armed with all this chaotic fluency and a list of idioms, we need to issue a very serious warning.
A very necessary warning.
Because idioms are powerful, they are the secret handshake that gets you into the culture, but they're also heavily booby-trapped. If you use them incorrectly, they will blow up in your face.
They are notoriously fragile linguistic constructs. The Practice Me source we analyze explicitly outlines the 5 mistakes learners make with common idioms, and understanding these pitfalls is critical if you want to sound natural rather than sounding like a broken translation robot.
The first one is the most classic trap of all, word-for-word translation. You simply cannot take an idiom from your native language and translate it directly into English, assuming the metaphor will survive the journey.
It rarely does.
The source gives a brilliant example from Spanish, the phrase tomar el pelo. Now, if you translate that literally, word for word, it means to take someone's hair.
Which means absolutely nothing in English. If you walk up to an English speaker in London who is telling a joke and you say, "Excuse me, are you taking my hair?" they're going to look at you in sheer terror, thinking you are threatening to scalp them.
It sounds so aggressive.
The English equivalent, the idiom that carries the exact same pragmatic meaning of teasing or joking, is pulling your leg. The meanings align, but the words do not map one-to-one. You cannot trust direct translation with idioms.
The second pitfall involves prepositions. These are the microscopic little words in, on, at, under, over that dictate relationships between things, and they ruin absolutely everything for learners because they often defy logic. As the sources emphasize, if you are undecided about a choice, you are on the fence. You are never in the fence.
Because on the fence creates a specific visual metaphor of sitting precariously balanced on top of a dividing line, able to fall to either side. If you say you're in the fence, you are suggesting you are physically embedded inside the wooden planks, which destroys the metaphor entirely.
Or earlier, we talked about feeling unwell. You are under the weather. You are not below the weather or beneath the weather, even though those words are technically synonyms.
Right. The synonyms don't work.
If you change a single preposition, the entire phrase shatters like glass, and it instantly flags you to a native speaker as someone who doesn't quite grasp the language. It's like entering a complex password on your computer, but capitalizing the wrong letter. Access denied.
The third mistake highlighted is a formality mismatch, which is a failure to read the room. Idioms carry different weights of register. Some are deeply casual, some are formal.
You have to know your audience.
If you are sitting in a boardroom with a CEO and they ask you for a status update on a highly complex multi-million-dollar corporate merger, you do not smile and say, "Don't worry, it's a piece of cake."
Oh, wow. That would be a disaster.
Because piece of cake is a childlike, highly casual idiom. Using it in a high-stakes corporate setting makes you sound flippant, disrespectful, and dangerously naive about the complexity of the merger. You have to match the idiom to the social register of the environment.
The fourth mistake is overloading. The expert advice warns against the temptation to cram 5 idioms into 3 sentences just to prove how much you've learned. Imagine someone walking into the office and saying, "I was feeling a bit under the weather, but I decided to bite the bullet, go the extra mile, and really hit the nail on the head with this report before finally calling it a day."
It sounds incredibly robotic and forced. It is a caricature of native speech. Native speakers use idioms like rare spices. They sprinkle them in lightly to add flavor to the conversation. They don't dump the entire spice jar into the soup at once.
And finally, mistake number 5, changing fixed words. Idioms are locked in stone by centuries of cultural use. You cannot swap out a word for a synonym just because you feel like being creative.
The rules are rigid there.
You cannot walk up to a group at a party and say, "Let's crack the ice" instead of break the ice. You cannot point at Dave and say, "He spilled the rice" instead of spilled the beans. Well, I mean, you can say it, but people will think you are either deeply confused or running a very messy kitchen.
This fragility raises an incredibly important structural question. If idioms are this delicate, if one wrong preposition or one swapped noun ruins the entire phrase, how do we actually help learners absorb them correctly without inducing a state of constant anxiety?
How do we teach it safely?
How do we build that linguistic muscle without raising the affective filter? This leads us perfectly into the final and perhaps most fascinating segment of our analysis, pulling back the curtain on how these deep dives in shows like the English Leap podcast are scientifically engineered to trick your brain into learning the right way.
I find this part absolutely riveting because we are looking at the actual matrix of instructional design. We are looking at the source code. How do you build a piece of audio or video content that teaches a highly complex linguistic system without ever feeling like a lecture?
The foundational psychological framework we rely on here is called the Cognitive Theory of Multimedia Learning, or CTML, developed by Richard Mayer.
Okay, CTML.
This theory is entirely focused on the limitations of human working memory. Your working memory is the part of your brain that processes new information in real time, and it has a very strict bottleneck. It can only hold a few items at a time before it overflows.
So you have to be careful what you put in there.
Instructional designers using CTML aim to optimize what is called germane load, the mental effort that is actually dedicated to understanding the language, building schemas, and locking in memory.
So germane load is the good stuff. That's the muscle building.
Yes. While simultaneously, the designer must ruthlessly eliminate extraneous load. Extraneous load is any mental bandwidth wasted on confusing presentation, distracting sounds, poor formatting, or irrelevant information.
How does that actually translate to what the listener hears in their headphones or sees on their screen? It sounds like you have to engage in intense sensory management.
Absolutely. The sources discuss a specific rule within CTML called the coherence principle. This principle dictates that all extraneous words, pictures, and sounds must be excluded.
So keep it clean.
This is why highly effective educational podcasts or videos avoid using distracting, loud background music underneath the dialogue, or flashy ornamental graphics that don't serve a specific pedagogical purpose. If there is a wacky air horn sound effect playing every 10 seconds to force a comedic moment, the learner's limited working memory is forced to process the auditory shock of the air horn, which steals processing power away from the phrasal verb being discussed.
The air horn literally deletes the vocabulary from your active memory.
It disrupts the encoding process entirely. Another fascinating aspect of this is the redundancy principle. Intuition might tell you that if you were watching an English learning video, having full verbatim subtitles at the bottom of the screen, every single word the host says would be helpful.
That feels like common sense.
The redundancy principle proves the exact opposite.
Wait, really? Subtitles are bad for learning.
Verbatim subtitles can actually hinder deep learning due to the split attention effect. The working memory has two separate channels, one for visual processing and one for auditory processing. When you display every single word on screen while the person is speaking, the learner's visual channel and auditory channel are forced to process identical texts simultaneously.
It's too much data.
The brain gets overwhelmed trying to sync the reading with the listening. Instead, the most effective method is applying temporal contiguity.
Temporal contiguity. That sounds like time travel. What does that mean for a video editor?
It means that a designer should only flash the key collocations, the specific target idioms or phrasal verbs like bite the bullet, on the screen at the exact millisecond they're spoken by the host.
Oh, just the target phrase.
The visual text appears concurrently with the auditory sound. It provides a visual anchor for the target vocabulary without overloading the cognitive channel with the rest of the sentence.
It's a highly targeted sniper rifle approach to vocabulary rather than just blasting a shotgun of text onto the screen. And even the script architecture itself, the actual pacing of the show, is mathematically engineered.
The structure matters immensely.
The Zennik source we reviewed breaks down the anatomy of the perfect educational episode. They argue it should be 10%, hook grabbing the listener's attention instantly with a relatable scenario so their affective filter drops immediately. 15%, intro setting the roadmap and building anticipation. 60% main content, that is the meaty, interleave storytelling, the banter, the ghost stories, and office complaints. And finally, 15% outro, a tight summary, and a call to action to solidify the memory traces.
It is a very deliberate, calculated architecture. The structure is the invisible scaffolding. It provides the psychological safety and organization necessary to balance out the chaotic, conversational comedy we discussed during the interleaving segment. The chaos happens inside a very safe container.
If I can pull all of this together into an analogy, if your brain is a computer, traditional rote learning, sitting in a classroom trying to memorize lists of prepositions and conjugations, is like having 50 Google Chrome tabs open at the exact same time.
A nightmare scenario.
You are trying to process the grammar rule. You are trying to translate from your native language. You are processing the fear of failing the test. You are worrying about your accent. And you are trying to remember how to spell the word all simultaneously. The working memory is overloaded. Extraneous load is maxed out. Eventually, the CPU overheats. The system crashes, and you freeze up in the middle of a sentence.
A very accurate representation of the affective filter at work.
But the conversational comedy approach, the Room 101 format, it acts like a task manager. The humor closes all the anxiety tabs. The engaging storytelling closes the boredom tabs. The targeted visual cues manage the processing tabs. And it leaves your brain's CPU entirely focused, with all of its processing power dedicated to just absorbing the language right in front of you.
When the affective filter is lowered, the cognitive bandwidth becomes fully available for acquisition. The brain does what it evolved to do.
Well, we have covered an absolutely massive amount of ground in this deep dive. We started by surviving the agonizing universal trauma of the morning routine, hitting snooze, distinguishing the nuance between getting up and waking up and dealing with alarms going off.
A tough way to start the day.
We navigated the treacherous, jargon-filled waters of the corporate world, trying desperately not to drift off during a Zoom meeting, while our boss forced us to touch base and fend for ourselves. We explored the complex social science of talking rubbish, from analyzing viral monkey videos to learning how to spill beans without pulling someone's leg.
We really went everywhere.
And through it all, we unpacked the cognitive psychology, proving that a low-anxiety, humor-filled, slightly chaotic environment isn't just an entertaining distraction. It is the fundamental biological key to achieving true fluency.
If we synthesize all of this, the psychology, the linguistics, the instructional design, it leaves us with a truly fascinating perspective shift. We spend so much of our lives being frustrated by friction. But what if the minor daily annoyances that aggravate us the most, the things we so desperately want to banish to room 101, the blaring alarms, the freezing floors, the agonizingly boring corporate meetings, are actually the greatest linguistic tools we have?
I love that idea.
The friction generates the passion generates the hyperbole, and the hyperbole generates the vocabulary.
The friction is the fuel for the fluency. Don't fight the chaos of your daily life. Lean into it, narrate it, embrace the complaints, find the humor in the mundane misery, and watch how quickly your English fluency naturally follows. The next time you are standing shivering in your freezing bathroom at 6:30 a.m., don't just suffer in silence. Complain about it out loud in English.
But before we completely wrap up, looking at the trajectory of how we learn, there is one final, larger question that this material provokes. We spent this entire time talking about how to bypass the affective filter using humor and human connection. But we are rapidly approaching an era of real-time, AI-driven translation earbuds.
Oh, that's true. The tech is moving so fast.
Within a few years, you might be able to speak in your native language, and the person across from you will hear flawless, idiomatic English in real time, and vice versa.
The ultimate technological shortcut.
Exactly. The technology will act as an artificial external language acquisition device. It completely eliminates the affective filter, because you never have to learn the language at all. There is zero friction, zero anxiety, and zero grammar drills.
Sounds like a utopia for introverts.
But if the technology removes the struggle, what happens to the human element? We just established that the friction, the comedic misunderstandings, the shared laughter over a butchered idiom, and the chaotic storytelling are the very things that build social bonds and empathy. If an AI perfectly translates our words without us ever having to try to understand each other's culture, do we lose the secret handshake entirely? Will we lose the cognitive workout of conversation? Or will human beings simply invent a new layer of linguistic complexity just to ensure we still have a way to playfully test who is really in the tribe?
That is a brilliant point to end on. If we outsource the language, do we accidentally outsource the connection? Something to seriously think about the next time you use a translation app instead of just trying to speak. So as we officially wrap up this deep dive, we encourage you to go out, dive into your day, embrace the friction, and remember, the best way out of the linguistic torture chamber isn't a textbook. It's just to laugh your way through the door.